Karma is an eternal truth that exists whether we believe in it or not. Today, my channel explores a case from South Korea where revenge and retribution intertwined in ways that even the most thrilling movies couldn't imagine. On February 26, 2019, a man named Lee Hee-jin reported to the Donggon police station in Anyang City. He was concerned about losing contact with his parents, his 62-year-old father and 58-year-old mother. For those familiar with our previous coverage of South Korean cases, you'll understand the typical approach of the Korean police. They often show minimal concern even for missing children, let alone elderly adults. This case proved no different. The police were notably indifferent to Hee-jin's report. Based on their experience, cases involving two elderly people simultaneously going missing were extremely rare. Most elderly missing persons cases were usually misunderstandings or, at worst, medical emergencies while out. However, Hee-jin insisted his parents were in perfect health with no underlying conditions that could cause sudden death. Even if they were ill, the probability of both falling ill simultaneously was practically impossible. After consideration, the police suggested that Hee-jin's parents had likely just gone on a trip, or had some business without informing the family. They told him to wait at home for news. This waiting period stretched over 2 weeks. Finally, on March 16th, still unable to contact his parents, Hee-jin was forced to return to the police station. For a second time, this time the police acted with surprising speed. Just 2 days later, on March 18th, they discovered a horrifying scene at the Hyundai apartment complex in Gwangyang, Donghan District. In the wall cabinet, they found the heavily decomposed body of Sunja, Hee-jin's mother. The tragedy didn't end there. That same afternoon, a report came in from rural Pyeongtaek. A local warehouse manager reported an overwhelming stench that villagers had been noticing for days. When they investigated, they found an elderly man's body in a refrigerator. DNA tests later confirmed it was Lee Deok-ju, Hee-jin's father. These two horrifying discoveries on the same day pushed Hee-jin to the brink of collapse. But what shocked him even more was the information in the forensic report. What did this report reveal? Without question, Deok-ju and Sunja had been brutally murdered. Their bodies were covered in so many wounds that forensic experts couldn't determine the exact cause of death. This wasn't simply a murder. It was a prolonged torture session that continued until both victims drew their final breaths. The deaths were determined to have occurred on February 25th, just 1 day before Hee-jin first went to the police station. A bitter truth emerged. If the police had taken the initial report seriously, they might have collected more crucial evidence. Even though they couldn't have saved the victims, the investigators seemed unfazed by this oversight. To them, this appeared to be a typical revenge case. All details pointed in one direction. They believed that by following the victims' social connections, the perpetrator's identity would soon be revealed. The investigation team split into 2 groups, one investigating the area around the crime scenes for potential witnesses, while the other began examining the victims' relationships. Sure enough, near the warehouse where Deok-ju's body was found, several villagers reported possibly seeing the perpetrator. The specific situation was described as follows. On the evening of February 25th, the day of the victims' deaths, there was an unpleasant odor near the warehouse. Some curious villagers followed the smell to investigate and discovered a strange man burning a bag behind the warehouse. Logically, burning trash in a remote area isn't a major offense. At worst, it might warrant a warning. However, oddly enough, the stranger fled in panic before the villagers could say anything, disappearing almost instantly. Although the villagers found this strange, it was dark, and nothing serious seemed to have occurred, so they dismissed it. Looking back, they realized this mysterious man could very well have been the murderer. The villagers told police that the man wasn't tall, was somewhat overweight, and judging by his running speed, wasn't very athletic. He was likely not a local farmer. This lead about the mysterious man was quickly passed to the team, investigating the victim's social connections. However, a puzzling detail emerged. No one, from family members to neighbors, could recall anyone matching that description. Instead, they all insisted that the Lee couple lived very privately and always treated everyone well. No one could imagine them being involved in such a bloody revenge killing. However, Hee-jin, the victim's son, had a completely different perspective. As soon as he learned about the burned bag, he suggested that police investigate this as a robbery murder. His reasoning made the investigators jump. On that fateful morning of February 25th, Heejin had just sold his Bugatti Veyron and had given his parents 500 million won, about $400,000 in cash in a bag for safekeeping. Just hours later, they were brutally murdered, and now a stranger was caught burning a suspicious bag. Could this really be just a coincidence? Upon learning this information, police immediately researched the couple's apartment. The investigation results further supported Heejin's theory. There was no trace of the 500 million won or the bag containing it. Checking the victim's bank accounts revealed no unusual transactions involving such a large sum. All signs pointed to this being a premeditated robbery. Notably, information about Heejin selling his car was known to very few people, suggesting the perpetrator was likely someone familiar with the family. However, another strange detail caught the investigators' attention. Why did the killer preserve Mr. Deokju's body in a refrigerator at a rural Pyeongtaek warehouse, while leaving Mrs. Sunja's body to decompose naturally in the apartment wall cabinet in Anyang? Perhaps this wasn't simply a robbery. This situation could be explained in several ways. Maybe the killer acted alone and couldn't transport both bodies, or the vehicle was too small. Alternatively, they may have intended to move both but encountered an unexpected situation. However, the Korean investigators proposed a bolder theory. They suggested that leaving Sunja's body to decompose naturally wasn't random. It could have been an act of intentional revenge compared to Deokju. It seemed the killer harbored a deeper hatred for Sunja. All clues pointed to one conclusion. The killer must be someone familiar who had a personal vendetta against her. But just then, an investigator noticed a major contradiction in the entire story. He asked his colleagues, "When you heard about Heejin selling his supercar, didn't you notice something? He must be extremely wealthy, so why sell the car at this time?" When asked about the reason for selling the car, Heejin casually replied, "I have many nice cars. Selling a Bugatti Veyron was simply getting rid of excess, nothing special." This seemed to be the issue. If Heejin was that wealthy, why were his parents living in such an ordinary apartment? In previous cases, whenever wealthy people lived so discreetly, it was usually to hide something. With this in mind, the investigator checked the Lee family's background. The findings were startling. The Lee couple didn't just have Heejin as their only child. Heejin had an older brother named Hee-moon. As soon as this name was mentioned, the scattered pieces of the case began falling into place for the investigators. The fact that Hee-moon's parents became victims of a massacre seemed almost unsurprising, leaving them to wonder why. Let me tell you the story behind Hee-moon's name. In October 2008, South Korea fell into an economic crisis that pushed many citizens into financial hardship. During this time, many people turned to the stock market and investment funds as a lifeline. Hoping to find a source of income to improve their lives, Hee-moon emerged as a rising star. He quickly earned glamorous titles in the financial world, such as the Warren Buffett of Korea and Cheongdam's #1 stock trader. His reputation grew rapidly in Seoul's financial circles. By 2014, Hee-moon's name had spread beyond investment circles. He became a familiar face on major media outlets, from the Korean Economic Channel to various television stations. Lee Hee-moon had built a perfect image of a successful businessman, young, talented, and dazzlingly wealthy. Hee-moon claimed to have graduated from the English Literature department of a prestigious private university in Seoul. During his college years, he claimed his exceptional tutoring skills earned him about 5 million won, approximately $4,000 monthly. However, due to his sharp financial acumen, after graduation, he did not pursue a career related to English. Instead, he went straight into investing. As a result, he achieved a dramatic class jump in less than 10 years. Not only did he buy a mansion in Seoul's wealthy Gangnam district with cash, but he also owned luxury vehicles including a Bugatti, Lamborghini, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley. However, all of this was not what truly caught the attention of ordinary people. What made Hee-moon notable was his apparent dedication to helping common individuals by freely sharing his investment expertise. He regularly shared his investment secrets on television shows and even helped manage finances for some devoted followers. Just imagine if a renowned, wealthy, and successful person offered to manage your finances. Wouldn't you jump at the opportunity? As word spread, many people wanted Hee-moon to help them make money. Faced with this rising investment wave, he reluctantly opened an investment consulting company to handle matters for more cautious investors who preferred to trade on their own. He-moon generously shared lists of guaranteed profitable stocks. The Lee family quickly turned this opportunity into gold when his younger brother, He-jin, established a P2P lending company to help those who wanted to invest but lacked the necessary funds. In a brief period, the brothers accumulated a massive fortune of over 20 billion won, about $16 million. However, behind the glamour of a stock market mogul lay a dark truth that no one expected. All investors who trusted him gradually fell into complete bankruptcy. When some victims became aware and began investigating He-moon, they discovered a shocking truth. His entire background was fabricated. Not a single detail of his past was real. For instance, he claimed to have graduated from a prestigious university, but in reality, he had never even attended college. His social media posts flaunting his wealth were all fabricated. He claimed he was about to become the distributor for Lamborghini and Bugatti in South Korea. Upon verification, due to South Korea's small market size, Lamborghini had never considered establishing a new distributor there. Even more outrageous was when, in the summer of 2016, He-moon posted on Facebook, claiming he had just landed at an airport in China and was preparing to have dinner with a high-ranking official from Jiangsu province. At the time, almost no one questioned this, feeling only impressed by He-moon's connections. It wasn't until he was caught and imprisoned for fraud and illegal trading that this story resurfaced online. Chinese authorities were forced to deny the claims, stating that Jiangsu had no such official that He-moon had mentioned. Moreover, the photo of the Chinese airport he posted was simply downloaded from the internet. In short, the entire post was a fabrication, leading to the complete collapse of He-moon's empire. Unfortunately, the investors he deceived also collapsed with him. Thousands of people lost their entire investments, and many were left with enormous debts. Some victims, unable to cope, tragically ended their lives in despair. One can imagine that if He-moon hadn't been imprisoned, he might have been killed by his victims. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that some people, unable to take revenge on him directly, might turn their anger towards his parents. However, if this was truly the case, solving the crime would be extremely difficult because He-moon had deceived so many people. Just as the police were struggling with this dilemma, the officer who had earlier discovered the contradiction proposed an idea. The reporter, He-jin, had been concealing his brother's identity to hide their past and hadn't informed the police about his brother. Now that this veil had been lifted, there was no longer a need for secrecy. Perhaps now he would share more useful information for solving the case. This officer's intuition proved correct when investigators confronted the truth. He-jin indeed revealed more information, like a dam breaking. He disclosed that after his brother, He-moon, went to prison, although they had returned some illegal funds, the family still retained significant cash and assets. This was why they had to live discreetly, avoiding attention from curious eyes. Moreover, since his brother had been in prison for some time, he initially didn't think his parents' deaths were related to this matter. In short, he was just trying to justify why he hadn't previously disclosed everything. After these meaningless explanations, He-jin mentioned something strange that made people think. On February 25th, the night of the murders, he had received a message from his mother on a messaging app. His mother said she had just met a successful Harvard graduate, a businessman named Kim Jong-ho, and wanted He-jin to arrange a time to meet him to discuss potential business cooperation. So, He-jin added Young-ho as a contact and planned to chat online first. He intended to meet in person if there was potential for cooperation. Unexpectedly, during their conversation, He-jin accidentally clicked the video call button and the other party connected. At that moment, He-jin caught a glimpse of Jong-ho's round, full face. Initially, this seemed like a perfectly normal occurrence. However, the strange thing was that forensics had determined that both victims were murdered on the evening of February 25th. How could Soon-jia have sent messages to He-jin? At this point, there were only two possibilities. Either forensics had incorrectly determined the time of death, or the person messaging He-jin was the killer. If it was the latter, this self-proclaimed Kim Jong-ho could very well be the murderer. The attempt to meet He-jin might have been intended to kill him too, with revenge against the family as the motive. Therefore, the police immediately created a sketch based on He-jin's description. They showed the sketch to the villagers who had seen the suspect. Everyone agreed that the person in the sketch looked quite similar to the mysterious man who had burned the bag near the warehouse on the night of the murders. confirming the suspect's appearance and identity. The police used this information to check surveillance cameras around the crime scene. They quickly spotted the suspect in street camera footage. Upon carefully analyzing the surveillance video, investigators discovered a crucial detail. The suspect didn't act alone but had 3 accomplices. However, due to poor image quality, the police could only identify and arrest the mastermind, Kim Dae-eun, the person who had impersonated Kim Jong-ho. To approach the victim's family through a messaging app, contrary to investigators' expectations of a hardened criminal, Dae-eun proved quite forthcoming. Immediately after his arrest, he admitted to all his crimes and willingly revealed his motives. But the story he told was even more shocking than his crimes. As the police had suspected, Dae-eun was one of Hee-moon's countless victims. However, unlike most of those who were deceived, he wasn't an ordinary victim. Dae-eun came from a privileged background. Having completed both his bachelor's and master's degrees in the United States, he successfully established a yacht rental company there and thrived for many years until August 2017 when tragedy struck. His business failed and his marriage fell apart, forcing him to return to South Korea. After returning home, Dae-eun planned to use his remaining assets to rebuild his career, continuing the yacht rental business in the Yonggi area. Unexpectedly, he happened to meet Hee-moon. Since Dae-eun was looking for investors at the time, Hee-moon, with his wealth and influence, became someone he wanted to impress. As a result, he not only participated in Hee-moon's financial projects, but even gave Hee-moon's father 20,000 won, about $16,000, as spending money. Finally, with Hee-moon's collapse, Dae-eun, who had returned from America hoping to rebuild his life, was also scammed into complete bankruptcy. Since Hee-moon was already sentenced to prison, Dae-eun couldn't take revenge on him directly and decided to target his family instead. However, due to Dae-eun's poor physical condition, to ensure his safety, he claimed to have hired 3 young Korean Chinese men online. Dae-eun stated that these 3 men were the ones who actually killed the elderly Lee couple, while he only handled planning and crime scene cleanup. Immediately after the murders, the 3 accomplices allegedly flew back to Jilin Province, China. Although this temporarily prevented South Korean police from arresting all suspects, it didn't affect their determination to pursue Dae-eun. As the primary perpetrator, the logical next step would be the standard trial process. However, what investigators did not expect was that when detailed information about the murders of the elderly Lee couple was reported by the media, it sparked major controversy. Instead of condemning Dae-eun's brutal actions, the South Korean public unanimously voiced support for him and called for the court to reduce his punishment. This strange reaction led many to question. No matter how despicable Hee-moon was, his parents were innocent. How could the Korean public be so blind? The truth behind this reaction was even more shocking. Hee-moon's financial empire was actually a family business where each member played a role in the fraud scheme. His parents were not merely innocent bystanders. They actively participated in management, particularly Soon-ja, the supposedly innocent mother. Soon-ja regularly appeared on her son's paid channel, using her image as a respectable mother to persuade and lure people into investing in the stocks their family promoted. After the scheme was exposed, Soon-ja was also convicted. However, she only received a suspended sentence and a fine of 50 million won, about $40,000. Simply put, the elderly couple were accomplices to their son's crimes. However, when faced with public criticism online, the couple not only failed to apologize. They coldly declared that no one in all of South Korea studies stocks as seriously as their son, implying that convicting Hee-moon of fraud was unjust. Now you understand why public opinion sided with Dae-eun, don't you? Just when the case seemed to be reaching its conclusion, an unexpected twist emerged. The 3 Korean Chinese accomplices, after returning to China, suddenly posted shocking accusations about Dae-eun. If Hee-moon was a financial fraudster, then Dae-eun was even more vicious. He deceived people to take lives. Dae-eun's previous statements about being only the mastermind while the other 3 were the direct perpetrators suddenly collapsed. These 3 individuals revealed the frightening truth behind the murders. Everything began about a month before the tragedy when Dae-eun posted a job listing for security guards online. The 3 young men were attracted by promises of an easy job with attractive pay, applied, and were quickly hired. But when they completed all procedures and made the long journey to South Korea, Dae-eun's first request was not for normal security work. It was the horrifying task of transporting two elderly corpses to a remote warehouse in the countryside. Fortunately, these three young men were not foolish. When they discovered they were transporting corpses, they immediately refused Daeon's request and fled back to their country. In other words, the three supposed accomplices were actually laborers whom Daeon had lured from China to South Korea, and they were completely innocent in the massacre. All crimes were committed by him alone. However, the South Korean police could not hastily believe these accusations. While requesting China's cooperation in extraditing the three men, authorities thoroughly investigated the group's movements during their time in South Korea. What they discovered supported the three men's testimonies. None of them had received any money from Kim Daeon. In fact, one of them had to borrow 200,000 won, about $160, from local friends just to buy a plane ticket home. This detail completely contradicted Daeon's claim about hiring them to commit murder, but this discovery led to a bigger question. If Kim Daeon had lied about these three men's roles, was his entire previous confession reliable? Were there other secrets behind the case waiting to be revealed? Following this line of investigation, it became clear that even the revenge-killing story was a lie. Kim Daeon had committed this crime for different reasons. For over a year prior, he had posed as a private detective to approach victims of Hee-moon's fraud, particularly those who had gone to his house to demand compensation, and indirectly gathered information about the current personnel. He also stalked the parents, installing tracking devices and wiretaps in their car. Moreover, as mentioned earlier, on the morning of the murders, Hee-jin had given his parents 500 million won from selling the car, and this money eventually disappeared. Some might think that taking the money while seeking revenge was convenient. Why waste it? The issue was that the timing was too precise. Could this really be coincidental? Later, police discovered a crucial detail. Hee-jin's Bugatti Veyron had actually sold for 1.5 billion won, about $1.2 million. He had given his parents 500 million won, keeping 1 billion won, about $800,000, for himself. His parents knew about this. If his parents knew, then Daeon could have known through his wiretapping devices. That's why, after the murders, he immediately tried to meet Hee-jin. The purpose was likely to steal the remaining 1 billion won. While coordinating to meet Hee-jin in person, Daeon was also in contact with a broker to prepare for an escape to the Philippines, keeping 1 billion won, approximately $800,000, for himself. His parents knew about this. If his parents were aware, then Daeon could have known through his wiretapping devices. That is why, after the murders, he immediately tried to meet Hee-jin. The purpose was likely to steal the remaining 1 billion won. While coordinating to meet Hee-jin in person, Daeon was also in contact with a broker to prepare for an escape to the Philippines. At any moment, piecing everything together, the police concluded that Daeon was the sole perpetrator of this crime, and his true motive was robbery. Consequently, the Suwon Supreme Court indicted Kim Daeon on multiple charges, including robbery, murder, corpse disposal, and illegal trespassing. He was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment in the first trial, although he appealed in 2021. The Supreme Court rejected his appeal and upheld the original sentence. Notably, by this time, Hee-moon, who had been convicted of fraud, had been released after serving his prison term, logically several years in prison. His parents' horrific deaths should have taught him a lesson and led him to reform his life. Unexpectedly, after laying low for a while, Hee-moon resurfaced and began using Bitcoin to commit fraud. After his crimes were discovered, he was arrested again on September 2nd, 2023. However, this time he was quickly released on bail. Perhaps the most bitter aspect of this story is that after his release from prison, Lee Hee-moon seemed unaffected by his dark past and the deaths of his parents. Using his remaining wealth, he married a female idol, built a family, and enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. This case isn't just a tragedy about greed and revenge, but also serves as a warning about how people can lose their humanity for money. Some commit fraud without remorse, while others readily kill for robbery, leaving permanent scars on society. And that's today's case. What are your thoughts on this situation? Share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on other intense cases. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.